Our panel today is exceptionally distinguished. I just found out one of them is a congressman. So, I mean, good for me for finding that out 5 minutes before the panel. Clearly, I read that biography very well. But they come to you from different parts of the world with very different ideas and very different focus points, but I think really kind of bring together a very enriching conversation, which shows how youth can penetrate in almost every space, and how they've done it in very unique and transformative ways. So I'm going to start with Edda Harma, who is a sustainable fashion entrepreneur. She goes around the world teaching about sustainable fashion and ethical fashion. And I told her she'll have to give me a crash course. But Edda, you work so much on the Sustainable Development Goal 12, sustainable consumption. And I was hoping you could tell us about your experiences in this space and why you think fashion is, first off, the important place to start, but how it ensures youth inclusion in a larger global picture.
Thank you, Alaa. So my name is Edda. I am from Australia, and I work to promote and educate sustainable and ethical fashion. And I work with young people on a day-to-day basis, educating them about diversity and ethics and equality in the fashion industry. What I'm finding, especially in Australia, is that young people find sustainability and ethics behind the scenes of fashion fascinating. You know, everything from diversity on the runway to child labour in garment factories. This is something that young people are endorsing, standing up for, I should say. And particularly on social media, fashion is a big industry in social media. And young people are starting to endorse products and people and movements that are sustainable and ethical. And it's incredible to see how socially minded these young people are. Fashion is unique in that it cuts through so many different goals and industries and areas, and it's such a huge cycle that it involves so many people. And I think it's becoming more and more important to reach out to young people and listen to them and respect what they have to say, because they are such an in tune, socially, environmentally passionate generation. From my experience, that we really need to harness that and support that and work with them to make the world more sustainable. They are the future leaders, so they're not a force to be reckoned with in the future, absolutely.
And so how do we institutionalize that, though? So it's wonderful everybody's learning about sustainable fashion, but how do we institutionalize it? How do we take it to the big fashion houses? How do we take it to the stores that employ, women and children for less than 3 cents and the buildings that are falling down? How do we institutionalize this knowledge and this passion?
Yeah, it's a huge cycle. It has so many players. We have consumers, we have fashion agents, we have developing nations that play a part, and it is a change that needs to come from every area of the cycle. At the moment, I'm working very heavily with changing the minds of consumers, but we need to see accreditation bodies, and we need to see governments come on board to, as you say, regulate the industry and ensure that these things don't happen, and involve young people in that process, and as well with universities and education. It's only in the last 2 years in Australia that I've seen sustainable fashion as a subject in fashion university. But now it's kids are coming out of fashion school and they know sustainable fashion, and they're making their final collection sustainably.
So Giorgio, you didn't wait until anybody came and asked you your opinion. You were a leading youth activist, and now you are a congressman, and you've utilized technology as a great equalizer, I'm sure as many people in this room have, to reach larger audience. So can you tell me, why do you think technology is the great game changer? Because I personally always thought it was cliche. People would be like, the young people, the mobilizers, they know technology, and I can barely work my phone. So how do you think we can use technology to harness more collective action?
Thank you, Alaa. Well, first of all, I need to say that I'm very happy to be in a woman panel. It's like always different. It's like only men, so I'm very happy to be in
Oh,
the
don't
only
worry.
men.
This will be the new normal.
No,
Get used to it.
Yes, no, I'm very happy. I'm truly, I feel like home. I only have sisters, so I'm very happy. I think that technology can be a cliche, but can be something else too, if it's used properly. And I think that we are living in something that you told me that you didn't understand as a concept, but a transitional era or age. Because in these exciting times, we're facing so much situations like global warming, like the consciousness of a very unequal world, not only countries, but the technology can make us very close to the problems globally, and we can act globally too. The nation states are like falling as a concept because of the technology and the flowing of people. I mean, the immigration issues has to be addressed globally because it's not only a nation problems. And I think that we as generation have a different point of view in many of those goals. I mean, the sustainable goals, we as generation grow up knowing that there was challenge. And different as Edda, I work with not so young people, you know, in the Congress. And when we legislate, when we make laws to run a country, I always think we as generation are underrepresented. And we have the responsibility to be in those power spaces to let them know that the times that they lived when they were young are different now, and that we want to give this world to new generations. We have to stand up, you know, and speak up for these subjects. And the only way we have, that we don't have capital, we don't have different like accumulations, we don't have media, but we have technology that can be a democratic tool for make this game change, you know, for having a bunch of people trying to push a few people that are making decisions. So we are a generation more horizontal than a hierarchy and vertical. So I think technology can do that.
So can you give us an example from your own experiences of when you saw technology as a great, a great mobilizer, amplifier, connector? When was something key, either in your activism or through your political career?
For us, for example, in 2011 student movement that was very massive in Chile, it would be not impossible, but very difficult if we didn't have media. For example, to denounce when were like human rights violations on the streets, you know, for the policemen, to take photos, to take videos, to upload them, and the media cannot say another things. The official voice could not say another things. And this is not only in Chile, in a lot of countries that people rise up. The social media can be a tool to not let the official vision to censorship, to make censorship on that issues, and to not protect particular interests but the public good. And I mean, the demonstrations in Chile is one example, and it's near to my experience, but probably all of you have been through a different process where technology can make the difference. But I don't want to fetishize this. It's not something that works only without organization. The organization has to be in the grassroots, you know, and then the technology can habilitate the other process.
As a catalyst.
And not otherwise. I mean, the technology is not magic tool, but can be an amplifier.
For sure. Nicol Perez is the U.S. observer to the United Nations. And I told her she's going to have to explain what exactly that means. But I was extremely excited to see that it was a young woman, because often when we talk about youth, people assume it's young men, particularly in global politics. And when we talk about women's rights, people talk to older women. And so young women tend to be excluded from both conversations. And I'm really glad that you're in this space. So you mentioned that economic growth to you is an area that you focus on and you think is key, particularly to the manifestation of the rest of these goals. Can you tell us a little bit about your work, how you became the observer, and why you think economic growth is so pivotal?
Yeah, so I'll start by giving everyone sort of a briefing on what my role is, because U.S. Youth Observer is a very weird title that nobody's ever heard of. But essentially my role is to capture the voices of young people and bring them to the table at the United Nations, and then to bring everything that's happening at the United Nations back to you guys. So I'm a listening post for young Americans, and I'm trying to capture all of the issues that you guys are interested in and bring those to the table at the UN and global conversations that are happening. And yeah, and the way I became Youth Observer is, it's kind of crazy, and I still can't believe it. I've been in this role for about a month and a half now. But I moved to New York City. So I'll give you some background. I was born in Bolivia, moved to the US when I was 7, and my parents and I went through like really, really tough economic times coming here, which sort of ties into why I'm so passionate about economic growth and decent jobs. And I never grew up, talking about global issues at my dinner table. I didn't really know what the UN was until I was a junior in high school. And when I started, I joined Model UN as a junior in high school and was so excited. It was the first time I really got access to more information on what the UN does. And then when I moved to New York City for my first job out of college, I literally sat down, and I knew that the UN was headquartered here, and I just Googled how to get involved with the UN. And a bunch of things started coming up. And I found the UN Young Professionals Program, emailed the head of the Economic Development Committee, and then we had a call like 3 days later. And then I started getting more involved with the UN. I found out about the Youth Observer role, applied last year, did not get it. And at first I was crushed. I was like, I'm never applying for anything ever again. But then I was like, no, I'm going to double down. I'm going to work hard. And I got more involved with the UN Young Professionals Program. I was a blogger at the SocialGood Summit last year. And I started getting more involved with the UN. And then I applied again this year, and here I am today. So a lot of the work that I focus on, well, one is capturing the voices of young people, but two is I'm really passionate about economic growth and decent jobs, specifically for young people, because I feel like your career and your jobs and what you do in your everyday life give you so much purpose. And I just want to make sure, so a lot of the conversations I have with young people, with my friends and people on social media, is around, I'm graduating from college, or I'm trying to get an internship, or I'm trying to start a business. Where can I find the resources to do this? Where can I find the resources to learn about, one, how to get a job? And so I think young people, because we're such a huge generation, and specifically here, so around the world, we're the biggest youth generation ever. And here in the US, millennials recently surpassed baby boomers. So we're the largest generation in the US. And which means we have insane economic potential and economic growth, and we can drive economic growth. And so I'm passionate about providing young people with the resources that they need to, one, find the jobs that they're passionate about, two, find ways where that they can, so to give background, I had a conversation with somebody, and I was like, what issue are you passionate about? Which SDG? And she was like, honestly, I'm just trying to pay my bills. Like, I can't focus on anything else if I can't put food on my table and if I can't pay my rent. And I was like, oh my gosh, yes. So that's SDG number 8, decent jobs and economic growth. And so I'm passionate about providing young people with the resources that they need to do the things that they're passionate about, to make their passions their job. Because I think ultimately that's what's going to help drive our economies and help drive all of these other goals.
You've been in the UN a while when people are having normal conversations with you about food on their dinner table, and you're like, that's SDG number 8. Good job. So I'm going to open the floor to questions. I know many of you have been so inspired, and now you guys are all profusely writing these beautiful essays and stories and blogs, and you're so filled with questions you have for this panel to really put the finishing touches. So first question, who's brave? I'll go in with the question. An icebreaker, exactly. But how do you think media can play a role? So everybody here works predominantly in the media, and how do you think people in the media can play a role either in economic growth or in sustainable fashion or in technology in ensuring not that they amplify voices only, but that we actually change the institutional structures? Because we often hear as youth as amplifiers, mobilizers, but they're very rarely brought at equal level to the table. They're included towards the end of a process. People use them as a bouncing off, like, oh, so we've decided to do this, what do you think? And they might modify things a little. But how do we get youth to really be the initiators? And how can we use media to really engage in that way? Would like to take it? Edda?
Have youth participate physically? I mean, can we invite youth to be a part of the process of creating the content? Can we step back and let the voices of youth, people around you that are youth, can you draw on them and be a bit of an observer, like Nicol? I guess taking a step back and giving youth some spotlight.
Nicol?
Yeah, and I am constantly talking about not only traditional media but social media. I work at Instagram. I sit on the Facebook campus, and we're always talking about how is social media being used to catalyze action, not just to amplify the voices or share thoughts, but to incite and inspire action. And I think oftentimes when we talk about, when governments or different institutions say, like, okay, we have to engage youth, let's create a social media account. Creating a social media account doesn't mean you're actively or meaningfully engaging young people. Yes, it is important to have these accounts because that is where young people are, and in order to connect with them, you need to be where they are, and a lot of these young people are on social media. But don't just throw information at them, but ask them to be a part of the conversation. And so I think a lot of the times, or even when we talk about creating policy, like governments need to invite young people to come to the table, because young people are, especially if you're creating policies for young people, they are the ones that know what their biggest needs are. You can't be in a room full of older people creating policies for young people. Like, young people need to be at the table. Just like when let's say we talk about women's health. You can't have a bunch of men deciding policy on women's health. So it's the same concept, but you need to be bringing young people in. And I think the biggest part of this is making sure that, a lot of the feedback we get is like, oh, young people don't have enough experience, they don't know how things work. Okay, but educate us. And once you educate us, then we'll be able to actively participate and be significant contributors. So don't belittle young people because they don't have experience.
Well, I actually love that you brought up the educate us part, and that young people don't know how it works. I always wonder if we don't know how it works or we just think it should work a little differently, and we're probably right. But because I've heard that since I started, my work, people would be like, "You don't know how it works," and I'm like, "Well, we'll make it work my way, and I think it'll go quicker." But then again, my parents have called me impatient since the day I was born. I didn't even get to the hospital in time, so it was okay. So, Giorgio, you've said that technology is this great equalizer. You said it's horizontal rather than vertical. And, social media has been brought up, even within sustainable fashion, putting it out there in the media, making these visualizations clear, really showing representation through media. So, in your view, now you're somebody who has gone from being an activist in the streets to a politician. And that's quite rare, and that's quite unique, especially at such a young age. Where do you think that desire to stop really working in the streets, but rather becoming political? And how do we think we can get more young people to feel like, that's the space they need to be in?
I don't know if that's the only space, but I truly believe that we have to be also there. And when I talk about technology, I'm not talking about only digital things. I'm talking technology, broader than that. I don't know if any of you have read Jeremy Rifkin's Zero Marginal Cost Society book. Somebody? No? Jeremy Rifkin, no? Well, I recommend it seriously. I mean, he's talking about the third revolution era. I mean, different industrial revolution and the different revolutions that our societies have been through. And he said that he's saying that the technology today, I mean, solar technology, the technology to have better drugs, the technology to have food, I mean, better food, and the different kind of technology change our economy from a scarcity-based economy into an abundancy technology. And if you change that paradigm, all the system, I mean, all the capitalist era of accumulating in exchange of scarcity, you have to think a different model. And when you will have like zero marginal cost in all the things that you made, really you have to change all the economy. And about politics and engagement of people, I know a friend of mine, he's in California right now, and he's creating this platform called democracy.earth. And they based her system in a voting, online voting system based on the same system like blockchain. I don't know if you know Bitcoin. Bitcoin is based on blockchain. There's a new distributed information system, and he's applying that to democracy for having a safe and encrypted voting system that works wherever you want. So you can have more continuous participation for the young people.
Yeah, more inclusive. Go right ahead.
This is actually a question from Twitter. Oh, sorry. This is actually a question I received from Twitter. Someone asked, how can youth contribute in this goal to reach the Sustainable Development Goals? How can they contribute? And also, it's twofold. They want to contribute, but they feel like they lack support. So where can they go to receive support?
A wonderful question to close up on, and just to kind of build on that, you spoke about a society of abundance, and now we're asking, so how do we actually do this, especially if we don't have support? And how is the idea of a society of abundance relatable to a lot of youth around the world who don't have security, clothing, food, support to be able to go out and make these kind of changes? So in answering that question, I would like you to both give us an answer for youth here in, let's say, the United States and in the developed world, but more broadly for youth who have no structure, no capacity, and who live in societies where if they heard society of abundance, they would be a little confused. So why don't we start with you, Nicol?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's a great question, and one that I get asked a lot. And one of the biggest things that I say is, if you see that your local government or regional or national governments are lacking in some way, it is our jobs to hold our governments accountable. And so if you feel like, one, I don't have the resources to do something, ask for them. And go out of your way to ask. So for example, if you're in university and you're like, I don't have the resource, I'm trying to start a business, I don't know how to do it, I want some more guidance, go look for mentors. Ask your leaders at your university and say, hey, we don't have a program, we don't have like an incubation program to help young youth-led businesses. Ask, because a lot of the times we think, my Google search didn't show up any solutions for the question that I asked. But when you go and ask, a lot of people are willing to help. And I think in terms of globally, young people play such a huge role in the least developed countries. In the 20 least developed countries, young people are the majority. And so when a lot of voices speak up, you will be heard. And I think that's the biggest thing to remember, is that there's power in numbers, and you need to be using your voices. You need to be going out there and speaking to people about the issues that you care about, and about why there aren't structures in place. So it's our job, especially as youth, to hold our government accountable.
So Giorgio, in closing up, how do we reach the youth who cannot access Google search, who don't go to universities? How do we reach them? Because they are the vast majority of global youth.
Yes, it's quite a challenge, because all of these goals probably show us that our societies have been evolving through the time. And if we see our history, the conquers, I mean the social demands that are now reality, like the female voting, the civil rights, and all the different challenges, they were because people rise up. I mean, rise up and get conscious about something. And those who have the privilege understand that that privilege are based on injustice. And I think that all of us who have different opportunities, we have the responsibility to change this injustice. And we have not to be like walking in the street and see with indifference all this the injustice. And I think we don't have to contribute to these goals. We have to make them our own and live with them for having a prosperous future for our children and grandchildren. I mean, if we don't act now, probably the earth will not be suitable for our living in 3 generations. And that's quite that's a threat, a bigger threat than any terrorist, anything. It's the nature. We would not be able to stop if we don't start right now, yesterday. So I think that we have to be conscious, all of you, if you work on media, we have to make this urgent, not something that is like a mainstream, something fashionable to be sustainable. No, it's like something urgent. And I think that's our responsibility too.
I love that privilege is the result of injustice. So, Edda, in wrapping up, can you tell us how you've been able to work with people who may not necessarily have the support at home to really engage in these sustainable development goals, and what you really see as the priority in the coming, months, years, moving forward?
Yeah, I think what I would love to do going forward is to connect these two worlds that are living very different lives and bring awareness to each other and connect and work together. I think that would be a beautiful thing to see people perhaps of privilege and people who are in developing worlds come together to find solutions and to pick an SDG that speaks to them and start something. What can young people do? They can start something. You're equipped with technology. Whether it be a business, whether it be a movement, it could be a hashtag. Anyone can start something. So I think to wrap up, I think picking an SDG, learning about it, and just do it. Just start something.
Wonderful. Last sentence, Giorgio. What do you think we need to do now? What do you think is the urgent?
It's not about us to be listened. It's us to be represented and us to be, making things happen. Not to be listened. The panel was how or why should be listening young leaders or the youth. And I think that we don't need to ask for be listening. We have to take the power. The power, always you said like power is something there. No, power is everywhere. In our jobs, in our communities, in different places. And we have to be engaged for things to happen. If we just let them happen, will be different than what we want.
And Nicole, last sentence. What do you think?
I think the biggest thing for me is to learn and continue to educate yourselves. I think the more we learn, the more we're inspired to take action, the more we know about what's going on around the world, and even in our own communities, the more we're going to say, hey, something needs to be done about this. And so even if you do come from a privileged place, like, learn about what's going on around the world, and you'll be inspired, and it's almost impossible to learn about something and then not want to do something.